Story 1. The Forgotten Manor. Nestled deep within a forgotten forest, shrouded by trees whose gnarled branches clawed at the sky, stood a crumbling manor house. No one in the nearby village dared to go near it, not even in daylight. Legends whispered of a family who once lived there, only to vanish one moonless night over a century ago. They said the walls of the manor absorbed their cries, and anyone who ventured inside would hear those echoes. Elena, a young journalist, decided to uncover the truth. Her career thrived on the sensational, and the story of the Forgotten Manor promised fame. Equipped with a flashlight, a notebook, and an audio recorder, she set out, ignoring the villagers' warnings about strange occurrences and people who had never returned. The manor loomed like a beast, its broken windows resembling empty eye sockets. As Elena stepped inside, the temperature plummeted, her breath visible in the gloom. The floorboards creaked underfoot as she explored, her flashlight casting long, eerie shadows that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking. In one room, she found a dusty piano with keys stained a deep, rusty brown. When she touched it, a single discordant note rang out, echoing unnaturally through the house. She froze. From the corner of her eye, she caught movement, a shadow flitting across the wall, though no one was there. The room smelled faintly of burnt wood and something metallic. Suddenly, the door slammed shut, and a cold wind extinguished her flashlight. Panic gripped her as whispers filled the air, indistinct but growing louder, overlapping in a chaotic symphony of despair. Her audio recorder began to play back, though she hadn't touched it. A child's voice whispered, "Help us." Then came the sound of footsteps, deliberate and heavy, descending the staircase. Elena pressed herself against the wall, her heartbeat deafening in her ears. The whispers coalesced into a single voice, guttural and cruel. "Why have you come?" A figure emerged, pale and translucent, its face a mask of anguish. Its hollow eyes locked onto Elena. It raised a bony hand, pointing at her. The room seemed to collapse around her as a vortex of shadow engulfed her, pulling her into darkness. The whispers turned into screams, and her mind filled with images of the family, their faces twisted in terror as they were consumed by the house itself. When the villagers found her days later, she was sitting on the porch, muttering incoherently about the faces in the walls and clutching her recorder. Her hair had turned completely white, and she never spoke of the manor again. The recorder played a single phrase on loop: "It's not over." The house on Hollow Hill. At the end of a winding dirt road, shrouded in thick woods, stood a decaying mansion known as Hollow Hill House. For decades, it had been the subject of local legend, whispered about by townsfolk but never approached. They spoke of shadows moving in the windows and eerie lights flickering at night, though the house had no electricity. Some claimed to hear faint cries carried on the wind. No one dared to enter, not since the last family vanished without a trace 50 years ago. But Jason didn't believe in ghosts. A thrill-seeker and aspiring paranormal investigator, he saw the house as an opportunity to build his online following. Armed with cameras, motion sensors, and a flashlight, he made his way up the cracked stone steps. The air around the house was unnaturally still, the kind of silence that made every creak of the wood and rustle of leaves seem deafening. Pushing open the heavy oak door, Jason stepped inside. The air was cold and damp, carrying the scent of mildew and something faintly metallic. The grand foyer was covered in a thick layer of dust, the chandelier above swaying slightly, though there was no breeze. He set up his equipment and began exploring. Each room seemed more unsettling than the last. The kitchen was filled with rusted appliances and dishes still sitting in the sink, as if someone had left in the middle of a meal. The living room held a piano, its keys yellowed and cracked. Jason couldn't help but feel as though he was being watched. Then he found the diary. It was sitting on a table in the library, its leather cover warped with age. Inside, the entries were written in a neat, looping script, chronicling the life of the Grayson family, the mansion's last known residents. The entries started innocuously, recounting daily life, but grew darker with each page. There's something wrong with this house. The shadows, they're not ours. I've barred the doors, but they still creep closer every night. It wants us. Jason's breath hitched as he flipped to the last entry. The ink was smeared, the writing frantic. It won't let us leave. I hear it calling my name from the walls. We've made a terrible mistake. If you're reading this, get out. A loud crash from upstairs snapped Jason back to the present. He grabbed his flashlight and reluctantly climbed the grand staircase, its steps groaning under his weight. The second floor was worse than the first, colder, darker, with a sense of oppressive weight pressing down on him. As he moved down the hallway, he noticed the doors lining it were slightly ajar, as though inviting him to look inside. He passed a bedroom, its bed neatly made despite the decay. Another door revealed a child's playroom, toys scattered across the floor. When he reached the end of the hall, the last door slammed shut on its own. Jason froze. His flashlight flickered, then died, plunging him into darkness. Fumbling with his spare batteries, he heard it. A soft, rhythmic tapping coming from inside the room. It was followed by a voice, soft and sing-song, like a lullaby. Come out wherever you are. The tapping grew louder, more frantic. Jason's hands shook as he finally managed to fix the flashlight. The beam illuminated the door, which was now slightly ajar. Swallowing hard, he pushed it open. The room was empty, at least at first glance. The wallpaper was peeling, revealing strange symbols carved into the wood beneath. Into the corner sat an old rocking chair, slowly moving back and forth. Jason's breath caught when he realized the chair was occupied. A figure sat there, gaunt and shadowy, its head tilted unnaturally to one side, its hollow eyes locked onto him, and its mouth stretched into a smile far too wide. You shouldn't have come, it rasped, the voice echoing as though a dozen mouths had spoken at once. Jason stumbled backward, the flashlight shaking in his grip. The figure stood, its limbs unfolding like a spider's, impossibly long and thin. As it stepped toward him, the symbols on the walls began to glow, and whispers filled the room, dozens of voices overlapping, pleading, warning. He ran, down the stairs, through the foyer, and out the door. He didn't stop until he reached his car, gasping for air. The house loomed behind him, its windows dark and lifeless. But as he drove away, his rearview mirror reflected something he would never forget. The figure standing on the porch, watching him, its grin stretching ear to ear. Jason never returned to Hollow Hill House, but he wasn't the same after that night. At first, he thought he'd escaped, but then the shadows in his apartment began to move. His reflection lingered too long in mirrors, and at night, he heard faint tapping at his bedroom door. The house didn't need him to stay. It had followed him, and Jason realized the truth too late. Once you enter Hollow Hill House, it never lets you go. The Red Door. Mia had always loved exploring abandoned places. There was something thrilling about stepping into the forgotten, piecing together stories from fragments left behind. So when she heard about the old farmhouse on the outskirts of town, she couldn't resist. It had been empty for decades, and locals swore it was cursed. What intrigued her most was the rumor. In the center of the house was a single red door, locked tight, and no one had ever been able to open it. The farmhouse was decrepit, its roof sagging and windows boarded up. Vines crawled up the faded wood siding, and the front porch was caved in at one corner. Mia pushed open the front door with a creak and stepped into the musty darkness. The interior was just as decayed as the outside. Furniture sat covered in dust and cobwebs. Wallpaper hung in curling strips, revealing stained, crumbling plaster beneath. But her eyes were drawn to the hallway at the back of the house. There it was, the red door. Unlike the rest of the house, the door looked new, its glossy paint unmarred by time. It stood out starkly, its color vibrant and almost wet-looking, as though freshly painted. Mia approached it slowly, her heart pounding. There was no handle, no keyhole, just smooth red wood. She placed her hand on its surface, and a chill shot through her fingers. The door didn't budge. Mia spent the next hour searching the house, looking for a key or mechanism that might open it. The more she searched, the more unsettled she became. The house felt wrong. Shadows seemed to shift in her peripheral vision, and faint whispers tickled her ears. She chalked it up to her imagination, determined not to let fear get the better of her. Frustrated, she returned to the door. "What's your secret?" she muttered, pressing her ear to it. For a moment, there was nothing. Then she heard it, a faint knock from the other side. Mia jerked back, her pulse racing. "Hello?" she called out, her voice trembling. The knock came again, louder this time, followed by a faint scratching sound, as though nails were dragging down the wood. Something about the sound chilled her to the bone, but curiosity overpowered her fear. She retrieved a crowbar from her bag and wedged it into the seam of the door. With a grunt, she pushed, the wood groaning in protest. Finally, the door gave way, swinging open with a deafening creak. Beyond the door was darkness, not just the absence of light, but a void so deep it seemed to swallow her flashlight's beam. The air was freezing, and the faint smell of iron wafted out. Against her better judgment, Mia stepped inside. The floor beneath her feet was hard and cold, but as she moved further in, it softened. The ground seemed to pulse faintly, as though alive. Mia swept her flashlight around, but saw only blackness stretching endlessly in every direction. She turned to leave, but the red door was gone. Panic set in as she ran her hands over the smooth, unbroken walls. She was trapped. Then the whispers began. They came from all around her, overlapping and indistinct, growing louder and more urgent. Mia spun in circles, her flashlight shaking in her hand. In the distance, she saw something, a figure, pale and humanoid, crawling toward her on all fours. Its limbs were too long, its movements jerky and unnatural. "Stay back," she screamed, her voice swallowed by the void. The figure didn't stop. Its face came into view, hollow and eyeless, its mouth stretching impossibly wide in a grotesque grin. Mia stumbled backward, tripping over the uneven floor. The whispers turned to screams, a deafening cacophony that filled her head. The creature lunged, its skeletal fingers reaching for her. She woke up outside the farmhouse, sprawled in the overgrown grass. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the field. Mia scrambled to her feet, her mind racing. She turned to the house and saw the red door standing alone in the field, detached from any wall or structure. It was open, and something was watching her from the darkness. She didn't wait to see what would emerge. She ran and didn't stop until she was back in her car. But as she drove away, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed her. That night, she awoke to find her bedroom door ajar, the faint scent of iron in the air, and in the corner of her room, a new red door stood, waiting.